One of the most interesting yet frustrating games I've played in the last couple years, but then again what did I expect from the guys that made Quantum Break. For those that don't know, Control is the 2019 abstract third-person shooting game developed by Remedy Entertainment. Yeah, the same dudes behind the early Max Payne games, Alan Wake and Quantum Break. As you can see from their library, their bread and butter are cinematic third-person shooters, and the game we're talking about today pretty much falls in line with that. I was definitely going to check this game out when I heard that it was influenced by the SCP Foundation. Listen, us SCP fans, we don't get shit, okay? As much as I like Containment Breach, Secret Laboratory, or whatever the fuck, it's nice to finally see an SCP related thing that isn't stitched together by tape and glue. And yeah, I know that it's heavily influenced and not a direct adaptation of anything, but that's good enough for me, goddammit. So what's the premise? Well, you play as Jesse Faden, the new director of the secret government agency known as the Federal Bureau of Control. Shit's been going down in their main base of operations, as an entity known as the Hiss has been turning agents into hostile red people and corrupting the reality of many parts of the building. This is where Jessie comes in, as she's the only one equipped to deal with the Hiss. You're probably asking, well, why? Simple, she's the only one that can do this. Good old telekinesis. However, don't get it twisted. Jessie's not doing this because she's some super nice person that likes saving people. At least, not at first. It's mostly to get info on her long lost brother's whereabouts, who's suspected to be somewhere in the building. So for the rest of the game, you're traveling throughout the building dealing with these Hiss assholes and interacting with these weird ass objects of power, which are basically SCPs. More on this later. Huh, typical day at the office, I see. So anyone with eyes can see that this game is pretty damn impressive graphically. All these characters look like real people, the animations are as smooth as silk, the government building looks straight out of a fever dream I had once. They did a pretty good job with the realistic brutalist architecture, doubly so if you have ray tracing, which gives everything a glistening polish. I swear that style just radiates dullness and depression. The feel of this game is definitely in that ballpark, but in a good way. Those stale office lights that illuminate many areas of this game adds to that. Speaking of which, this game does have some really good lighting. Same engine used for Quantum Break, but this game looks better for the simple fact that every room is methodically lit. If there's some omnipotent lighting in this game I definitely didn't notice, the sparse lighting coupled with these faint demonic chants in the background creates a pretty uneasy atmosphere. Of course, since this is a Remedy game, they gotta make everything all movie-like and dramatic. I mean, just look at these title drops when you enter a new area. Aside from some facial glitches here and there, the mocap performances are pretty good for the most part. Only performance I'm iffy on is our main characters. So did they give her a different mocap suit? Because her character rarely expresses any emotion. I get that Jessie's a serious character and the situation is tense, but there are some moments where she does get angry and sad. Thing is, you would only know through the voice acting since her character is always stone-faced.
Well done. You got the job. It's place for congratulations. Yippee, saatana. It happened in the last drop. I truly need an assistant.
Funny thing is, I've been a janitor. I'm more at home in that role than as the director. Only Ati here seems to see that.
Imagine if I continued the review like this. So I mentioned that this game looks pretty nice graphically, but there are some performance issues. Sometimes the map doesn't want to load up. There's a noticeable 4-second delay whenever you try to pause the game. Missions sometimes don't even want to start even though you're in the area. There's also a handful of sections where my frame rate just randomly tanked. Weird thing about this is that it didn't even happen in places with a lot of enemies, but instead in random dark hallways. I can't speak for the console versions, but I have heard that the frame rate issue is really bad on Xbox One. The amount of debris indestructible environments probably didn't help things, but man do I love this shit. Satisfies an itch I've had since Red Faction. Almost every object you see can be telekinetically picked up and launched. It makes the aftermath of a lot of battles look like a goddamn hurricane ran through the place. It must have been a real pain in the dick to code and debug all this shit, so props to all the programmers. I guess this is a good jumping off point to get into the meat and potatoes of what you do in this game. Obviously Jessie has the Force, but she's also equipped with the world's best handgun. This thing has a lot of different shooting modes to mess around with, but you can only have 2 gun types equipped at a time. The name of the game is mostly throwing stuff at enemies and then finishing them off with a couple of shots and vice versa. You have some other telekinetic powers such as melee and the ground smash that you get later, but honestly I didn't find these abilities very useful. It's pretty clear that you're supposed to abuse the launch as it does more damage than every other attack by a wide margin. Not to mention later on you fight shielded hiss where the quickest and easiest way to get rid of the shield is to launch something at them. I don't mind this too much since launching large objects at enemies generally feels good, especially when some guy's on the run and you knock his ass out with something. Shit gets even better later on when you can launch 3 objects at once while flying and shit, feeling like the girl boss version of Magneto. However, despite all this, I do feel like 2 to 3 more offensive telekinetic powers are missing. As fun as launching is, relying only on that move all the time did make things a little bit repetitive. It's either that or shooting, which is okay, but I never felt like any of the guns did enough damage, even with the mods that increase damage and other stuff. Not to mention, you're kind of forced into sticking to the 2 guns you like the best since you don't get enough resources to upgrade everything. Still, even with the limited moveset, this game does a good job providing a fun challenge with all the different hiss types that keep you on your toes. Most of these guys are packing heat since they're former agents, and you gotta keep moving around since Jessie can't take damage for the life of her. This game isn't really hard, but there were many moments where I died unexpectedly. It sort of stings too since whenever you die, you lose a percentage of your resources. A little harsh, but at least they didn't go full Dark Souls where you're at risk of losing all your currency when you die. Speaking of which, this game does have a bonfire checkpoint system with all these control points. It's where you upgrade skills and weapons, but it's also the main way you fast travel throughout the many different floors of the building. This game is Metroidvania-like in that while many of these floors can be explored non-linearly, many of the areas are locked behind doors that can only be accessed with higher level key cards that you obtain through the main story. Aside from combat, one of my favorite parts of this game was simply exploring and coming across these weird side missions dealing with these objects of power. This is when the game really gets weird. That mirror that leads you into another world where you have to fight an evil doppelganger, that freaking mannequin that surrounds you with other mannequins when you're not looking, this traffic light where you literally have to play red light green light to obtain it. There are many more instances like this in this game that keep things weirdly entertaining. Also, Jessie's personality does shine a bit more in these parts. It's just a shame that exploring is such a pain in the ass. Whoever designed this map needs to be spanked with the cactus because good lord this shit is unreadable. Everything is all cluttered together. Oftentimes the actual objective isn't where the marker says it is. Some people have said that you're supposed to use the map in tandem with the signs in the game. Only problem with that is that there's a great distance between most of the signs. What makes it worse is that you'll often get side missions in places you don't have access to until much later. The reason this is annoying is because the game doesn't let you know. So you'll be even more lost wondering how you're supposed to get to a certain area when you're not even supposed to be there yet. Like, why even make the mission available at all if you can't even get to it? I don't know how they would have done it, but this game definitely would have benefited from having a dead space waypoint system where you simply tap the analog stick and it shows you where to go. Yeah, it's handholdy, but sometimes stuff like this needs to be. Wandering around lost fighting the same respawning enemies made things pretty irritating. Speaking of which, these fucking puzzles, man. It's been a minute since the game's made me feel like a complete dunce, but here we are. Roughly half of these I caved in and just looked for the solutions online. I'm willing to admit that maybe I'm just an idiot, but I swear most of these puzzles don't give you enough clues to solve them. So for example, this puzzle in research to get the golden suit. So you have to get a 7 using this spinner thing. However, it won't land unless you have the correct conditions in place. So you have to turn on all the lights in this room, go to a separate room, flip the states on most of these knickknacks, take this fish into the other room and put it near the TV, and then as you spin this thing, you have to get off the carpet. Now tell me, would you have gotten any of that by looking at this drawing on this whiteboard? Is it just me? So eventually Jesse does find her brother Dylan, who's been held up in the containment sector. It's revealed by Marshall that he was being groomed into being the new director due to his telekinetic powers, but he eventually went apeshit for some reason and started killing agents. He breaks out of the containment sector, but luckily he surrenders himself again to the FBC. We later find out that the reason he's so deranged is because the dude's been brainwashed by the hiss. Well, only thing left to do now is to get rid of those guys, which is what Jesse proceeds to do. First, we gotta go through this maze, which was easily the funnest part of this game for me. A heavy metal theme song tied to the maze shifting, all while using all your late game abilities to obliterate everybody in your path. Hell yeah. Was not expecting something like this in an overly serious game like this, but I'm glad it's here.
That was awesome.
So this is usually the part of the video where I summarize the rest of this game's plot, but honestly, I didn't know what the hell was going on. All I picked up on was that there was some entity called Hedron that's important for some reason. Some trippy shit happens in this flashback, which I'm guessing is the hiss fucking with Jesse's mind. She eventually breaks free from that and cleanses the mind of her brother, stopping the hiss while putting her brother in a coma. With the hiss stopped for now, Jesse accepts her role as the new director, and yeah, that's about it. Okay, so obviously I oversimplified much of this game's plot, but there's a reason for that. Everything is so goddamn cryptic and esoteric. What the heck is the board? What are AWEs? And why do we keep coming back to this damn motel? There's most likely answers to all of these, but I couldn't piece it together. Every time this game went into talks about Trench, Darling, and the astral plane, all I heard was... I knew that this game was too deep for me when it was getting into Carl Jung theories. This isn't to say that I wasn't into it. The mysterious vibe of the world alone had me invested. I'm just not the type of player that likes reading through documents to piece things together. So yeah, if you want a detailed analysis of this game's story, then I'm definitely not the guy. After the main game, you got 2 DLCs that extend things quite a bit. The first one, called The Foundation, sees Jesse dealing with this nail object which is seeping the astral plane into the real world. You run around this cavernous area, which is a nice change of setting from the usual office environment, but aside from that, it's mostly business as usual. You got these new axe enemies which are pretty fun to fight due to them being highly aggressive. They're one of the only enemy types that bum rush you close up, so they really keep you on your toes. Honestly, an enemy type like this should have been introduced in the main game. Kind of disappointed that you don't get any new skills or guns though. Okay, well, that's sort of a lie. You do get a modification on your gun to destroy these crystals and are able to summon them, but the reason I say that it's not a real power-up is because these abilities are only used in the DLC area. A little disappointing, but this DLC is fine overall. What about the second one? Well, the second one is called AWE and it's pretty interesting since it ties into the universe of Alan Wake's. Jesse's summoned to the investigation sector where she has to deal with this disturbing looking darkness monster that haunts the halls of this place. You see, this monstrosity used to be somebody named Dr. Hartman who was investigating the lake place in Alan Wake, but not only did he get corrupted by the dark presence over there, but he also got corrupted by the hiss over here. This is the result of that double dipping.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Whew, these sections were intense. If you weren't superpowered, then this part would practically be a horror game.
What is that?
Powered by ugly darkness.
Come on, elevator, time to go!
In the darkness, your energy gets drained, and this scary looking asshole can kill you in 2 hits while teleporting around the place. Luckily, he's weak to light, and that's mostly how you deal with him. Gotta move quickly into these light spots and power up the whole place. It's a pretty fun change in pace. This DLC is a lot more memorable than the first one because of this. Also, there's some more weird objects of power that liven things up. The best one being this synthwave dreamscape where you have to catch this camera. A real show stealer. So yeah, that's Control. Pretty good game with some frustrating parts, but the good parts outweigh the frustration by a lot. The game looks nice, the telekinesis powers are fun, and the mysterious atmosphere is executed expertly. AAA games, especially nowadays, don't usually get this weird, so when they do, it's definitely something that should be experienced. If this looks like a game that you might enjoy, then you should definitely pick it up. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. Help this video out in the algorithm by doing the usual stuff, and until next time.